When I first took the job to renovate the old farmhouse on the edge of town, I thought it would be just another project. The place had been abandoned for years, left to decay among the fields and woods that surrounded it. The paint was peeling, the roof had holes in it, and the wooden floors creaked with every step. But beneath all that, I could see the charm that the house must have had in its prime. I imagined the memories it held, the stories it could tell, if only the walls could speak. Little did I know that one of those stories would change my life forever. The farmhouse sat alone at the end of a long, winding dirt road, surrounded by nothing but fields of tall grass and a thick line of trees. It had always been a bit of a mystery, even before it was abandoned. Some said it was cursed, others said it was haunted. But I never paid much attention to those kinds of tales. I was a carpenter, and all I saw was a job that needed doing. I started the renovation on a cool autumn morning. The air was crisp, and the leaves had just begun to turn, painting the landscape in shades of red, orange, and yellow. I unloaded my tools and got to work, pulling up the old rotting floorboards in the living room. The dust rose in clouds as I pried each board loose, filling the air with the musty scent of decay. It was hard work, but I didn't mind. I liked the feeling of taking something old and broken and making it new again. By midday, I had cleared most of the living room floor. That's when I noticed something strange. Beneath the boards, where the foundation should have been, there was a hollow space. At first, I thought it might have been a crawl space or a cellar that had been covered over, but there was no entrance to it that I could see. The space was dark, and even with my flashlight, I couldn't see much of what was inside. But there was a feeling, a sense that something wasn't right. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down and shined my flashlight into the darkness. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, something moving in the darkness. I blinked, but then it moved again. Slowly, almost deliberately, something began to emerge from the darkness. It was long and thin. Its skin glistened in the light. It had no eyes, no face that I could see, but I could feel it watching me. The sight of it made my skin crawl, and I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't move toward me. It just hovered there in the darkness, its many legs twitching in a way that made my stomach turn. I wanted to look away, to run out of that house and never come back, but I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes from the thing that had no place in this world. My mind raced with questions. What was it? How had it gotten here? And why hadn't anyone ever seen it before? But no answers came, only the growing sense of dread that filled the room like a thick fog. Finally, my legs found the strength to move. I turned and ran out of the farmhouse, leaving my tools and everything else behind. I didn't stop running until I was back in town, breathless and shaken. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because people started asking me what had happened. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them. How could I explain something that I didn't even understand? The farmhouse renovation was abandoned, left unfinished, and I never went back. Word got around town that something had scared me off the job, and soon enough people started talking. They said I'd seen a ghost, or maybe the spirit of the farmer who had lived there long ago. But I knew it was something else, something far worse. No one else has seen the crawler since that day. The farmhouse still stands at the edge of town, slowly crumbling as the years go by. Some say it's just an old house, nothing more. But others, especially those who remember what happened, believe there's something still lurking in the darkness beneath the floorboards. Every now and then, I hear people talking about the farmhouse. They wonder what really happened that day, why I ran away and never went back. Some even think about going out there themselves to see if they can find whatever it was that I saw. But I always tell them the same thing. Leave it alone. Whatever's out there, it's better left undisturbed. I had always dreamed of seeing the world's highest mountains up close. The idea of standing on the roof of the world, with nothing but the sky above and the earth spread out far below, was something that kept calling to me. So, when the chance to travel to the Himalayas came up, I took it without a second thought. I packed my bags, said my goodbyes, and soon found myself on a plane heading toward the towering peaks that I had only seen in books and on television. The journey wasn't easy. The air grew thinner as we climbed higher, and the cold bit at my skin, even through my thick layers of clothing. But every step I took brought me closer to the majestic mountains I had longed to see. The snow-covered peaks were like something out of a dream, and I couldn't help but feel small and insignificant in their presence. I traveled with a small group of fellow adventurers, each of us eager to explore the rugged landscape. We trekked through valleys and crossed icy rivers, always surrounded by the towering white giants. Every so often, we would come across a small village where the locals would welcome us with warm smiles and hot tea. But as much as I enjoyed meeting new people, it was the solitude of the mountains that I craved the most. One day, we decided to take a different route from the usual trails. Our guide, a quiet man who had spent his entire life in these mountains, told us about a hidden valley that few people ever visited. It was a place where the snow was untouched, and the trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with ice. It sounded perfect to me, a place where I could feel completely alone with nature. We set out early in the morning, just as the sun was rising over the peaks. The sky was a pale blue, and the air was crisp and clear. The path was steep, and the snow made it difficult to keep our footing, but we pressed on, driven by the promise of something extraordinary at the end of our journey. As we climbed higher, the trees grew thicker, and the world became quieter. I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before, a deep connection to the earth and the sky. It was as if I had left the rest of the world behind and entered a place where time stood still. We reached the valley just before noon. It was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The snow was pure white, untouched by human hands, and the trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. I felt like I was in a different world, a world of ice and snow, where nothing could disturb the perfect stillness. I wandered away from the group, wanting to explore the valley on my own. The snow was deep, and it came up to my knees as I walked. The trees were thick, and their branches formed a canopy above me, blocking out the sun. It was cold, but I didn't mind. I was too caught up in the beauty of the place to care about the cold. As I walked deeper into the forest, I began to feel like I was being watched. It was an eerie feeling, as if something was out there, hiding in the trees, just out of sight. I stopped and looked around, but all I saw were the trees and the snow. I shook off the feeling and continued walking, but the sense of being watched stayed with me. The trees grew thicker, and the light grew dimmer as I walked further into the forest. The snow was so deep that it slowed my progress, but I didn't want to turn back. I felt like I was on the edge of discovering something incredible, something that no one else had ever seen. I stopped again, feeling that same eerie sensation of being watched. This time I looked around more carefully, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. At first, I saw nothing. The trees were still, their branches heavy with snow. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. It was a shape, barely visible against the white snow and the dark trees. It was tall, and it seemed to be covered in white fur that blended perfectly with the snow. I stared at the shape, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was too big to be a person, and the way it moved, slowly and deliberately, made me think it was some kind of animal. But it didn't move like any animal I had ever seen. It moved with a purpose, as if it was aware of me and was trying to stay hidden. I knew the stories, the legends of the Yeti, the elusive creature that was said to roam the mountains. I had always dismissed them as just that, stories. But now, standing there in the silent forest, I wasn't so sure. The shape in the trees was unlike anything I had ever seen, and it was watching me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get closer, to see it more clearly, to confirm what I was seeing. But another part of me, the part that was deeply rooted in survival, told me to turn back, to leave the forest and rejoin the group. The shape didn't move. It just stood there, partially hidden by the trees, blending into the snow so well that if I hadn't been looking for it, I might have missed it. I knew I was looking at something extraordinary, something that very few people had ever seen. I took a step back, and then another. The shape didn't move. It just watched me, its dark eyes barely visible against the white of its fur. I took another step back, and then I turned and began to walk back the way I had come. I didn't run, but I walked as quickly as I could, the snow slowing my progress. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following me. I reached the edge of the forest and found my group waiting for me. They asked if I had seen anything, and I just shook my head. I didn't want to tell them what I had seen or what I thought I had seen. It felt too personal, too unbelievable. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. At least that's what my grandfather believed. He thought it was odd that I wanted to share his story, but after listening to some stories on your channel, I don't think it's just a tall tale. I live in Pennsylvania now, but my family comes from the deep South. My grandmother was a teacher, and my grandfather was a police officer. Back in the day, prisoners were often used as laborers, doing tough jobs like cleaning roadsides and digging ditches. My grandfather was one of the officers in charge of watching over these prisoners while they worked. His job was to make sure the prisoners stayed in line, got their work done, and didn't try to escape. He was strict, but he never allowed anyone to get hurt, no matter what side of the law they were on. One summer, in 1958, my grandfather was overseeing a group of prisoners working on drainage ditches along a highway near Guntersville, a town in Alabama. It was hot, sticky work, and the prisoners were not happy. The water they were standing in was dirty and full of weeds, and there were mosquitoes everywhere. They complained, but they kept working. My grandfather had a dog, a German Shepherd named Arizona, who was very serious about his job. Arizona would walk along the line of prisoners, keeping an eye on them. One day, Arizona suddenly became alert, his ears standing up. A moment later, one of the prisoners started shouting that something in the water was biting him. The water was murky, so no one could see what was happening at first. But when they pulled the prisoner out, they saw his clothes were torn, and there were red welts on his legs, as if something had bitten him. They thought it might be leeches, but then another prisoner started shouting and jumping around in the water. My grandfather decided to get all the men out of the ditch, even though some of the other guards thought it was unnecessary. The other dog on site was also acting strangely, staring at the water and whining. When they pulled the second prisoner out, they found his legs covered in tiny white creatures. They looked like leeches, but with little arms and legs ending in tiny hands and feet. These creatures were stuck to the prisoner's skin, and when the guards tried to pull them off, they clung on tightly. The guards tried to burn them off with a hot metal lighter. When they finally managed to remove one, it looked like it was screaming, its mouth full of sharp teeth. They stomped on it to kill it. My grandfather put one of the creatures in a box and locked it in his car. Suddenly, the dog started barking and growling, and my grandfather saw something big moving under the water. The next moment, the water exploded and something terrifying emerged. It had the body of a gator, but it stood up like a man. Its face was the worst part. It had a mouth full of sharp teeth, black eyes, and no nose. And it screamed. The creature attacked the nearest prisoner, and the dogs tried to fight it off. My grandfather shot at it, but even though he hit it, the creature didn't stop. It tore into the prisoner, and the other guards started firing at it too. The creature finally retreated back into the water, leaving the prisoner fatally injured. The guards brought the rest of the prisoners back to the jail. The sheriff called the FBI, thinking the creature might be some kind of alien or a threat from another country. Men in suits came to the jail, took the prisoner's body, and ordered everyone to keep quiet about what had happened. Later, the authorities announced that there was a dangerous alligator in the lake and warned people to stay away. My grandfather told me that when he went back to his car, the box with the creature was gone. He never found out what the FBI did with it. I don't know if this story is true, but it has always made me wary of that lake in Guntersville. It's a strange tale, but I guess it's up to you to decide what to believe. We had been friends for as long as I could remember. Every weekend we would meet up at the old, abandoned bridge just outside town. It was our spot. A place where we could escape the noise of life, talk about whatever was on our minds, or just sit in silence, watching the stars. That night, though, something happened that none of us will ever forget. We were all there. Me, Jason, Emily, and Sarah. Just like always. Jason was tossing stones into the water, trying to skip them across the surface, while Emily and Sarah sat on the bridge's edge, their legs dangling over the side. The night was calm, peaceful even, but there was an odd feeling in the air. It was something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a sense that something was about to happen. I brushed it off, thinking I was just imagining things, but it wasn't long before I realized that I wasn't the only one who felt it. As we sat there, the sounds of the night seemed to fade away. The crickets, the frogs, even the breeze, it all seemed to grow quieter. I looked over at Jason, who had stopped throwing stones and was now staring out into the darkness. Emily and Sarah were doing the same, their faces pale in the moonlight. That's when we saw it. At first it was just a shadow, something large and dark moving through the trees on the other side of the river. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but it was too far away. The shadow moved closer. It was a tall figure with large wings that seemed to stretch out on either side of it. It moved slowly, almost as if it was gliding through the air, and as it got closer, I could see that its eyes were glowing a bright red. They were the only part of it that was clear in the darkness, and they seemed to stare right at us, piercing through the night. We were frozen, unable to move or even speak. The figure was close now, hovering just above the treetops on the other side of the river. It was much larger than it had seemed at first, with wings that looked like they could wrap around us all. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I knew that the others were just as terrified as I was. The creature hovered there, its red eyes locked on us. I wanted to run, to get as far away from it as possible, but I couldn't move. None of us could. We were trapped, caught in its gaze, and all I could think was that we were going to die. Then, without warning, it let out a sound that I'll never forget. It was a screech, high-pitched and unnatural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. The sound echoed through the trees, bouncing off the river and filling the air around us. It was so loud that I had to cover my ears, but even that didn't block it out. It was as if the sound was inside my head, shaking me to my core. The creature's wings flapped, and with a single powerful movement, it took off into the sky. We watched as it soared above the trees, its red eyes still visible, even as it disappeared into the night. The sound of its screech lingered in the air, fading slowly until it was gone. For a long time, none of us moved. We just stood there, staring at the spot where the creature had been, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. My mind was racing, filled with 1,000 questions, but none of them had answers. What was that thing? Where did it come from? And why had it come to us? Finally, Jason broke the silence, his voice shaking as he spoke. He didn't say much, just a few words, but they were enough to snap us all out of our trance. We gathered our things and left the bridge, walking quickly back towards town. None of us spoke on the way back. We were too scared, too shocked by what we'd seen. When we got back to town, we went our separate ways, each of us heading home in silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red eyes staring back at me, and I heard that awful screech echoing in my head. The next day, we met up again, but it was different. The easy, carefree friendship we had before was gone, replaced by something else, something darker. We didn't talk about what we'd seen, but it was always there, hanging over us like a shadow. Every time we looked at each other, I could see the fear in their eyes, and I knew they saw the same in mine. I've worked as a park ranger at Redwood Grove Park for 10 years. It's usually a peaceful job, taking care of the trees, helping visitors, and making sure everyone follows the rules. Most days are pretty ordinary, but recently, something strange has been happening. It all began one afternoon when I got a call about a disturbance in the park. My colleague and I were close by, so we headed over to check it out. When we arrived, we saw something that didn't make sense. The park is usually calm, a place where families come to relax and enjoy nature, but this time, something was off. A young boy, maybe around 12 years old, was causing trouble with an older man. The boy was getting in the man's face, waving his hands and acting very angry. The man was just trying to ignore him, talking on his phone and looking uncomfortable. It was odd because the boy seemed determined to pick a fight with someone much bigger and stronger than him. We quickly stepped in to calm things down. But just as we approached, the boy suddenly turned and attacked the man, throwing his hands wildly. The man defended himself, just pushing the boy away to avoid getting hurt. Some people nearby started shouting, worried that the man was hurting the boy, but it was clear to us that the boy was the one causing trouble. We separated them and checked on the boy, who was surprisingly quiet and had only a few scrapes on his hands and knees. We didn't charge the man with anything since we saw what really happened. After filing our report, we thought that was the end of it. But then it happened again. A couple of weeks later, we got another call about a similar incident, again in the same part of the park. This time, it was a different boy and a different man. But the situation was the same. The boy was acting aggressively, and the man was trying hard not to react. We managed to calm things down before it got physical and filed another report. After that, things were quiet for a while. We thought maybe it was just a couple of strange incidents. But then, 2 weeks later, there was another call, another disturbance, and another boy behaving oddly. This time, I noticed something strange about the boy's eyes. They looked blank, like he wasn't really there. He only seemed to come to life when he saw someone he wanted to bother. The park officials started to worry that there might be a drug problem in the area. They increased patrols, and we caught a few people doing things they shouldn't, but nothing that explained the weird behavior of those boys. Things settled down for another 2 weeks. But then, we got a call about strange lights in the park late at night, long after it was supposed to be closed. My colleague and I went to check it out. When we arrived, we saw flashing lights in the trees, almost like someone was having a secret party. But there was something strange about these lights. They didn't look like anything we'd seen before. The colors were odd, and there was a low hum in the air that we could feel in our bones. As we got closer to the source of the lights, we felt uneasy, like something wasn't right. The light got brighter and the hum got louder as we moved deeper into the trees. Finally, we reached a small clearing, and the light was so bright that it was hard to see anything. I thought I saw something floating in the air, a dark shape that looked like a person. Suddenly, the light dimmed just enough for us to see more clearly. There were several figures in the light, but they weren't people we recognized. They were something else, something we couldn't explain. The hum got louder, and the light became blinding. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, my face in the dirt. My colleague was next to me, and so were a few kids who looked confused and scared. Our radios were working again, and we called for help. To this day, we don't talk about what happened. We reported it as breaking up a late-night party and left it at that. The kids were sent home, and we didn't see any more of that strange behavior after that night. But my colleague and I haven't felt the same since. Something changed that night, and I'm not sure things will ever go back to normal for us.